Welcome to Class 6 of English 101. This week we're going to give our attention to adjectives. And there's much to say about adjectives, so let's go ahead and dive in. Adjectives are words that are used to modify, limit, or describe nouns and pronouns. Adjectives will answer one of these 5 questions. Which one? What kind? How many? How much? Or whose. For the moment, just remember that adjectives modify, limit, or describe nouns and pronouns. Let's think about adjectives that would modify the noun dog. That dog, snarling dog, an 8-pound dog, my neighbor's dog, a little dog, a friendly dog, an unhappy dog. When we look at the list of questions again, which one, what kind, how many, how much, or whose, and look at the different adjectives that I have here describing the noun dog. The ugly dog. Well, that tells which one or what kind. The growling dog. Of course, that tells us again which one or what kind. The little dog. The 8-pound dog. My neighbor's dog tells me whose dog it is. The biting dog. What kind of a dog? So you can see adjectives modify nouns and they will answer one of those 5 questions. Adjectives will usually come before the noun they describe, even though there are some exceptions to that, and we'll speak of those exceptions a little later. But right now, let's just think of the fact that adjectives usually come before the noun they describe. Red rose, blue sky, tall building, beautiful painting, dark forest, wet glass, angry bee. All of the words in yellow are adjectives describing the noun that follows the adjective. Adjectives usually come after a linking verb that links them back to the noun they describe. Okay, so let's think about this. Adjectives usually come before the noun they describe, but adjectives usually come after a linking verb that links them back to the noun they describe. Here are a few examples. The sky looked ominous. The verb looked is a linking verb. It's linking sky to ominous. The children were frightened. Again, were is a linking verb and it ties the adjective frightened back to the noun children. Jennifer is redheaded. We have the linking verb is that links redheaded, the adjective, back to Jennifer, the noun in the sentence. We'll talk more about what type of adjective this is just a little later, but remember that adjectives usually come after a linking verb that links them back to the noun they describe. Another thing about adjectives is that several adjectives may describe the same word. The old, abandoned, eerie-looking barn was shrouded in fog. So we have 3 adjectives that are describing barn: old, abandoned, and eerie looking. All of those adjectives are descriptive of barn. Some adjectives are used to identify nouns and pronouns. That man, this girl, those birds, these books. Sometimes we don't think of these words, that, this, those, these, as being adjectives, but they are adjectives because they are identifying the nouns or the pronouns in the sentence. Quantifying adjectives tell how many. Several coins, many students, few dollars, 3 lions. Quantifying adjectives. So these words in yellow are adjectives modifying or quantifying, answering the question, how many? There are several coins. Many students went to the referendum. I have a few dollars to spend today. There were 3 lions in the cage. The articles a, an, and the are always adjectives. A picture, an apple, the Bible, a house, an elephant, the college. And remember, when using the articles a and an, we will use a before words that start with a consonant and an when used before words that start with a vowel. And there are, again, some exceptions to this that we will talk about later. But for right now, just remember the basic rule. We would use a before words that start with a consonant, as we see a picture, a house, and an when used before words that start with a vowel, an apple, an elephant. Just a simple rule to remember in relation to the use of articles. An adjective may be formed from a proper noun, and like a proper noun, when it is used in that way, it will begin with a capital letter. You see the examples I have on the screen. Belgian waffles, Mexican hat, Japanese restaurant, Korean congregation, Chinese food. Now, these are adjectives that are modifying these nouns: waffles, hat, restaurant, food, and congregation. Now, if we're speaking of a specific Japanese restaurant, then we would capitalize the entire name because it's the name of something. But in this, it's just a reference to a restaurant, a Japanese restaurant. Not speaking of a specific restaurant, not giving a specific restaurant name. It's just saying that restaurant is a Japanese restaurant. They serve Japanese cuisine. Now, there are certain adjectives that are made from verb forms, and these are referred to as verbals. And these words are used as adjectives. You can see up in the right-hand corner there that I have several, just by way of illustration. Burning building, demolished car, wrecked train, burnt toast, torn dress, dealt cards. These are words that are verb forms, but they are used as adjectives describing. The word burning, that is a verb form, but it is a burning building, so it is a word that's modifying the word building. So in this phrase, burning building, is used as an adjective. Participles are verb forms that are used as adjectives. I have a few examples here. The customers saw the man shoplifting in the store. Shoplifting shoplifting is an adjective modifying the word saw. They saw him shoplifting. The burning building could be seen from miles away. Burning is an adjective modifying building. The wallet found on the sidewalk was turned in to the police. Found is an adjective modifying wallet. So these are verb forms that are in these sentences being used as adjectives modifying another word in the sentence. Predicate adjectives are adjectives that follow a linking verb and modify a noun. These words are sometimes called subject complements. And this is what I was referring to earlier when I said we would come back to adjectives that follow a linking verb modifying the noun. Corey was confident about making the team. The verb was is a linking verb, and it links confident back to the subject, Corey. Corey was confident. The children were filthy. Were is a linking verb, linking the adjective filthy back to children. The children were filthy. It is a word that is describing or identifying the subject of the sentence. God's laws are perfect. Are is a linking verb, linking the word perfect back to laws. And so, therefore, it is identifying or renaming the word law. So, predicate adjectives are adjectives that follow a linking verb and modify the noun. In these two charts, I have a list of participles and predicate adjectives. Now you can see that participles are verb forms. Burning, demolished, wrecked, forgiven, burnt, torn, dealt, using, swimming, found, forgotten, wishing. Now these are all participles, and participles may come before or after the verb. So please remember that. And then look at the other chart. Predicate adjectives, these words are not verb forms. Friendly, perfect, tall, slow, helpful, clear, short, mild, handsome, accurate, bald, honest. And again, these are just samplings of participles and predicate adjectives, but to show the distinction between the two. Participles are verb forms. Predicate adjectives are not verb forms. Participles may come before or after the verb. Predicate adjectives come after the verb. Now let's look at a few examples. Participles are verb forms or verbals as they're called, and they are used as adjectives. Praying earnestly, John reached a decision. Praying describes John. John is praying. The package containing my diploma finally arrived. Containing modifies the word package. It's a verb form. The architect showed us the revised plans. What kind of plans? Revised plans. So these are participles and they're being used as adjectives. Now, in the next few examples, we have predicate adjectives or subject complements, and they add to or they complete the subject of the sentence. Miss Adams is knowledgeable on this subject. We have the linking verb is, and that links the word knowledgeable back to Miss Adams. So Miss Adams is knowledgeable. A clipper ship is slender and swift. So slender and swift are predicate adjectives that are adding to or completing the subject of the sentence, a clipper ship. Children become restless easy. Become in this sentence is used as a linking verb, and so it links children to restless, and restless describes or identifies the children. The children become restless easily. So that's a distinction between participles used as adjectives and predicate adjectives that complete or add to or identify or rename the subject of the sentence. Let's think about comparison. When we think about comparing things by using adjectives, then there are three different categories. We've got positive, comparative, and superlative. Now, in the positive use of our adjectives, there is no comparison. And we have a list here: exciting, diligent, helpful, difficult, reliable, beautiful. There's no comparison there. It's just stating that something is exciting, someone is diligent, there was a helpful person, this was the most difficult task. But when we compare two or more things using these same words, we would add either the word more or the word less. Exciting would become more exciting or less exciting, more diligent or less diligent, less helpful or more helpful, less difficult or more difficult. And then when we go to the superlative compares three or more things. Comparative compares two things, and it's more or less. When we compare three or more things, we would add the word most or least. This was the most exciting concert of all the concerts I have ever attended. Tom is the most diligent student in the entire classroom. Out of all the students, Judy is the least helpful. So we're comparing more than three or more things, and we would use the superlative. When we're comparing two things, we would use the comparative. And when we're just stating that something is, we would use just the positive. There are also adjectives that give absolute statements, absolute concepts. These are referred to as absolute adjectives, and you would never qualify them. You don't have any quantity there. So there's no comparative or superlative for adjectives such as perfect. If it's perfect, it's perfect. It can't be more perfect. It can't be less perfect. So perfect is an absolute adjective. Dead is an absolute. You can't be more dead or less dead. If you're dead, you're dead. A square cannot be more square, nor can it be less square. These are what we would refer to as absolute concepts. Here are just a few others that would fit into the category of absolute concepts. We would not have something that is more absolute or least absolute. Nothing can be more certain or less certain. If it's certain, it's certain. If something is meaningless, it can't be less meaningless or more meaningless. If something is excellent, it's excellent. It can neither be more nor less excellent. Final. If it's final, it's final. There's no more or less to it. Full. It can't be less full. Now, it can be less than full, but it can't be less full, and it can't be more full. If it's full, it's full. So there are absolute concepts that have no comparative or superlatives for their forms. There's another thing that we should always strive to resist, and that's the use of double negatives. Look at the four sentences that I have on the screen. They are not doing nothing about the traffic pattern. I don't have nothing to say about that. They found scarcely no animals on the island. Scott is so weak he can't hardly climb the stairs. Now, the first two, they just sound wrong, don't they? They are not doing nothing. Well, how would we correct that sentence? We would replace the word nothing with the word anything. They are not doing anything about the traffic problem. Instead of using two negatives, not and nothing, we would replace that second negative, nothing, with the word anything. Now, in the next example, I don't have nothing to say about that. We again have two negatives, don't and nothing. We would correct this by using the same word as we did in the first example. I don't have anything to say about that. So we would replace the word nothing with the word anything. Now, what about that third example? They found scarcely no animals on the island. Well, in our English language, scarcely is a negative word. So the sentence they found scarcely no animals on the island, scarcely and no are two negatives back to back, so we again have a double negative. So now how would we correct that sentence? We would say they found scarcely any animals on the island. Instead of having the double negative, scarcely no, we would have they found scarcely any animals on the island. And then the final example, Scott is so weak he can't hardly climb the stairs. Again, hardly in the English language is thought of in negative terms. So again, we would replace the negative can't with the positive can. Scott is so weak he can hardly climb the stairs. So again, we need to work diligently at not using double negatives. What about the words them and those? We need to always remember that them is a pronoun and it will never be used as an adjective. Instead, we would use the word those. Think about these examples. Pass me them potatoes. Them dogs are too loud. Bring me them shoes. Where are you going to put them flowers? Well, it may be common vernacular in some part of the country, but it's wrong. And we need to work diligently at using proper grammar. So how would we change these? Again, in every one of these sentences, we would change the word them, which is a pronoun, to the adjective those. Pass me those potatoes. Those dogs are too loud. Bring me those shoes. Where are you going to put those flowers? So let's strive to always remember that them is never to be used as an adjective. Them is a pronoun, and we need to use those instead. Now, let's just do some practice. I have a list of sentences here, and I have a choice of two words. Lightning is the faster or fastest horse in our stables. Would we use the word faster or fastest? Well, when we're thinking in this sense, we really don't know how many horses are in the stables, but chances are very likely there are more than two. We're probably comparing three or more. So in this sentence, Lightning is the fastest horse in our stables. We would not use the word faster because faster compares two. David was a friendlier or more friendly person than Nabal. Which of those would we use? Was David a friendlier person or was David a more friendly person than Nabal? In this sentence, we would use the word friendlier. If we can make the adjective, the comparative adjective by adding er, then there's no use in using the word more or adding the word more. So we would not say more friendly, we would say friendlier. The third example, it is better or best to be a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord than to dwell in the tents of the wicked. Would we use better or best? In this sentence, we would use better because we're comparing two things. We're comparing being a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord or dwelling in tents. So it would be better rather than best. You can't do nothing or anything to earn your salvation. It is a gift of God. Well, again, this one should be very, very simple. We know that the word can't is a negative, and then nothing is a negative. So to say you can't do nothing is to use a double negative, which we do not do. So we would say you can't do anything to earn your salvation. There are less or fewer men than women in my small group class. Would we use less or would we use fewer? In this sentence, we would use fewer. The reason for that is if we're talking about things that we can count, like women in my small group class, we would use the word fewer. If we were talking about something that you cannot count, for instance, if we were saying there is less sand in this bottle than there is in that bottle, well, sand is not countable, so we would use less. But when we're talking about things that are countable, we would use fewer rather than less. So there are fewer men than women in my small group class. Detroit produces more automobiles than any other city in the United States. Would we say any or any other? We would say Detroit produces more automobiles than any other city in the United States. We're comparing Detroit with all other states in the United States, so any other state. Them or those bananas came from Costa Rica. Well, again, them is a pronoun, never to be used as an adjective, so we would say those bananas are from Costa Rica. The Day of Atonement was the most holiest or holiest day of the Hebrew year. It is the holiest day. It can't be most holiest. We would not use most with a word that we add est to. We could say that the Day of Atonement was the most holy day of the Hebrew year, or we could say it was the holiest day of the Hebrew year. And then finally, the law of the Lord is perfect or most perfect. Remember, there are certain words that are absolute concepts. Perfect is one of those. It can't be more perfect, most perfect, less perfect, least perfect. If it's perfect, it's perfect. So we would say the law of the Lord is perfect. The next topic we'd like to approach on our discussion of adjectives is making sure we use exact and vivid adjectives. Adjectives add so much color to our writing and to our speaking, and used appropriately, they can add and enhance our speaking skills as well as our ability to keep an audience interest and attention. But now, if you look at these three sentences that I have here, there is actually one word we could fill in all six of these blanks. We could say the great preacher was a very great speaker, or the great lawyer presented a great case, or it is great to make great decisions. Well, all of those sentences would be correct, but they are certainly redundant. And so we want to be careful as to how we use our adjectives. Our first sentence could say, the young preacher was a very lively speaker. Or the old preacher was a very careful speaker. Sometimes we may use a word such as lively here, and we may think to ourselves, well, that's not exactly what I want to say. And so we can look that word up, lively. We can look that up in the thesaurus and ask the thesaurus for synonyms, and it will give us a list of words that are close in meaning to the word lively, and yet it could be a different word that would fit more closely into what I would like to say. For instance, when I check a thesaurus, one of the synonyms for lively is dynamic. And I feel to myself, well, that's a more appropriate word. So I change lively to the word dynamic, and my sentence would read, the young preacher was a very dynamic speaker. Or the young preacher was a very animated speaker. We want to just make sure that we're using vivid adjectives that will say as exactly as possible what we would like to convey. Our second sentence could be, the lethargic lawyer presented a lackluster case. Or adjectives that would describe it in any way that we would like to communicate. The educated lawyer presented a sure lock case. We can present it in any way to make sure that we're getting our point across. It is irresponsible to make thoughtless decisions. So what we want to do is make sure, again, that we're using adjectives that convey exactly what we want to say and use them in such a way as to make our communication more vivid and more attractive. The second thing we want to consider in using exact and vivid adjectives is that we need to be very sparing in the use of adjectives. In this sentence, you can see that I have 5 adjectives describing the word slope. Trying to descend the steep, rocky, slippery, icy, treacherous slope. The elderly woman grasped her cane as though each step might be her last. Now, we may want to convey all of that, but that seems to be a little wordy. And so we could actually communicate the same sentiment by condensing those adjectives down. For instance, we could say, trying to descend a very slippery slope, instead of saying, trying to descend the steep, rocky, slippery, icy, treacherous slope. Now, you may want to convey more than just the very slippery slope, and if that's the case, then certainly you may want to add 1 or 2 more adjectives. But we want to be very sparing in the use of adjectives. We just don't want to string a long list of adjectives together to describe one word. This is the last of our discussion on adjectives. There's so much more to learn on the subject of adjectives, and of course in further studies, excuse me, in further studies you will be going into much more detail in the use of adjectives. But hopefully this gets us a little more understanding about how to use them effectively, how to use adjectives in such a way as to enhance our writing and speaking skills. And next week we're going to turn our attention to adverbs, and I'll look forward to being back with you next week as we continue our study of English 101.